In this video, we're going to be going over a practice problem. So as a reminder, I'm going to be going over one practice problem in this video. And in the next video, I'm also going to be going over another practice problem. So basically, these practice problems are more focused on strings. Specifically, we're going to be interacting with and manipulating strings. So basically, let's jump straight into the problem to see what this problem is. So I basically use comments, which means the programs won't be considering this. It's only for us and anyone else to see what this program is actually supposed to do. And we're basically, in this problem, we're interacting with the string. So let's actually take a look. So the first line of comment I have is practice problem 1, which is capitalization. And now let's look at the steps. So the first step is to prompt user to input text. So that should be pretty familiar by now. And then our second step to this problem is to print out the text capitalized, which essentially means we're going to take whatever the user inputted and basically make the first character of that text capitalized. So if I had, for example, alright, which means something that user is going to input, then it's supposed to output that word capitalized. Or we can also have a set of words. We can have alright, this is CS50, and this would basically be alright, this is CS50. So that's basically what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be capitalizing the first character or letter of the whole string. Alright, so let's now jump straight into solving this problem. So the first step is to prompt user to input text. Now, for these, for prompting user for input text, I usually use variables like this, but it's actually not really readable per se. So anyone is reading this variable, they're not really sure what this n is supposed to mean. So what's actually better is to name our variables what the variable's purpose is. So in this case, the purpose of this variable is to prompt user for input. So instead of n, a better way to actually name this variable would be prompt. So now, if anyone looks at this variable, they'll now be more informed what this variable is actually supposed to do. It's supposed to prompt user for input. Whereas if I had n, and if somebody looks at this, they're going to be like, oh, what is n supposed to do? So that's basically one thing I want to point out is it's better practice to actually name your variables what they're supposed to do. So if I wanted to actually make this more descriptive and have more than one word, then I'll be doing something like this, right? So this is one whole variable, but there's something that you actually notice here. So prompt user input, but you see here that I'm actually capitalizing this u and capitalizing this I. So this is actually known as a concept called camel casing, which means it basically, to keep it simple, is basically distinguishing between different words all in one variable. So here we have one variable. I'm having more than one word. This prompt is one word, user is another word, and input is another and our last word. So camel casing makes it pretty useful to distinguish between words, specifically when we're naming our variables. So it's pretty clear that we see the prompt, all lowercase, is a first word. The next word, which is capitalized, is user. So anyone who looks at this can tell, oh, this is another word, user. This is another word, and then our last word here is input, which is also capitalized. So it's to distinguish between what exactly is a word. So if I were to actually make this I in input lowercase, and if I look at this, then I'm not going to be pretty sure if these are supposed to be different words. So that's why it's pretty useful to make it camel casing, and especially for style, to make the variable more readable, especially when you're using a variable that has more than one word. Alright, so now let's jump straight to input. So this is how it's formatted. Should be pretty straightforward. So you have input and in parentheses and in quotation marks. Now, one thing I actually want to point out is we don't have to have quotation marks, but the reason I actually put quotation marks is to make it clear what the user has to input. So in this quotation marks, I'm going to say enter your text. So if I run this, and you see that this is prompting user to enter text. So if anyone else were to look at this, they'll know that oh, I have to type in text. So that's makes it more clear. If I were to just remove this and only have input and open and close parentheses and run it, then we won't get some information of what we actually need to input. So that's why it's better to enter your put input and in some quotation marks specify what the user exactly needs to input. So let's actually jump straight into like the interacting with strings part. So we have this line prompt user for input. Our last step here is to print out the text capitalized. So there are multiple concepts we're actually going to be covering here. I'm going to just list them out in a comment. So indexing into a string. upper method. Specifically in this cases of this problem, we're going to be using the upper method and substring. So we're going to actually break it down concept by concept, what part of this is being implemented in this problem. So the first step is actually indexing into the first character, right? If you want to take the first character of a string, we need to do something called indexing, which means accessing this character. So recall that since indexing starts at 0, we would format this as the variable name, so prompt user input, the variable name here, and in square brackets, the number specifying the index or the position of what we want to access. So in this case, prompt user input, and in square brackets 0, which means the first, in this case in strings, when we're dealing with strings, we're accessing the first character of the string. So prompt user input and in square brackets 0 accesses the first character of the string. So recall for our lists, when you had the name of the variable and in square brackets 0, we're accessing the first data item. Similarly, for strings, we're accessing the first character of that string. So that's how we're using this indexing in the string. Now we have to make use of the upper method. So recall what the upper method is basically doing. Let me just put this in the comments so it's pretty clear. Upper basically converts letter or letter. So let me put letter and in parentheses s. So it can apply to one letter. It can apply to multiple letters. The main purpose of this method is to basically convert to uppercase. So I'm just going to note this down. So similarly to how we used upper in our strings video, well, we basically how we made use of it is we converted a word to uppercase. But in this case, we only need to capitalize the first letter of the string. So first of all, we're indexing to a string, right? We're taking the first character of that string, and we're doing dot upper to gain access to this method of upper. And dot upper basically converts this letter to uppercase. So to read this out is basically prompt user input index 0, first character, dot upper is converting that first character into uppercase. And that's what we need to have here. First character or letter is basically being capitalized. So now our last concept we're going to be using here is a substring. Now why we use substring is basically access the rest of the string. So we're accessing the first character of the string. So let me just have a note as an example. So if I were to say alright, and basically this prompt user input dot upper is taking this first letter and converting to uppercase. So here we already have uppercase A, so it's already going to be uppercase. But if I were to have alright with the lowercase, then it's basically taking this first letter and converting it to uppercase. So it's getting changed to uppercase A. That's what this dot upper is doing for us, right? But after we actually capitalize this letter, we need to concatenate this letter with the rest of the string. So A concatenate to LRIGHT till we reach the end of the string. So A concatenate to LRIGHT. Basically what I'm highlighting here. We need to concatenate this letter to the rest of the string. So now we're actually going to be using substring in that case. Recall what a substring is. It's the same thing as actually slicing a string. You're basically taking a part of a string. So say if you don't want to access the whole string, right? You don't want to access the whole string. You only want to take a certain part of that string. So that's what substring makes it useful for. And it's especially useful for the cases of this problem. If you don't want to access the first character, we only access the second character of the string and onwards till we reach the end of the string. So let's actually do this. So similarly to how we index into a string, we're basically just expanding onto it. So let me just copy paste this. So similarly to how we index into a string, we're just adding on to this by saying a number colon some number. But let's actually say that this is supposed to be 1, right? So user input, this is the start index of the substring I want to take from the string. 1 basically means the start index of a string, right? So if I wanted to access the second character, I would do prompt user input, which means the name of the variable, and in square brackets 1 means the start index. And to clarify, it is basically inclusive, so it's going to include this first character. But let's actually try to run this and see what the output is. I'm not going to say a user input for now. Let's actually see what's going to happen. So let me just say alright. It seems to actually work, right? So if I typed out alright, it's printing out the entire string, so or the entire word, with the first letter of that string capital. Let's now run another example and see what is happening. So if I say alright, this is CS50, we should see that this output is supposed to be the whole string with the first letter of this string capitalized. So let me hit enter see that we have this. All right, this is CS50 with the first letter of the string capitalized. So that's basically what is happening here. It seems we actually got this problem to work. So one important thing I actually want to point out is we don't need to actually specify the end index if we want to go to the end of a string. So we could just simply have the number we want to start our index at, and simply just a colon. We don't need a number after this colon if you only want this certain index to be, or the certain substring to be ending at the end of the string. So the end character of the string is basically this exclamation mark. This is CS50, exclamation mark. This is the last character we have of the substring, but we don't actually need to say the number. We just simply leave it as the start index colon, which means the start number colon end of the string, which means the last index of the string. So that's basically one thing you can actually think about. You don't actually need to specify the end index. It's basically gonna automatically go to the end of the string. But if I want to access till a certain limit, I don't want to go specifically to the last character of the string, then I would need to specify that end index. But by default, if we just have this, the end index is going to be the end of the string. So that's one thing I want to point out. It also makes it quicker to solve these problems. But if I were to actually change this to 2, the start index would be affected. It would instead start the third character. Let's actually run this to see what the output is to ensure. So if I do this, it's going to say alright, which is incorrect. So our start index is 1, and we're only going till the end of the string. So you just need to say the start index colon. And by default, the end index, if you don't have a number after this colon, is going to be the end of the string. So that's basically this problem. It's covering a multiple concepts. In this simple problem, we're actually going to be covering multiple concepts in this problem. For first, prompting user for input, which we covered towards the beginning of the series. We're also making use of indexing into a string, which means access this first character. We're using the upper method, which recall I used in the strings video, or what we cover in the strings video, to convert some letter or letters to uppercase. And this plus prompt user input, and in square brackets, the substring notation is accessing the remaining string, what is left after taking away the first character. And that's basically what we explored. That's a lot of concepts that we actually covered in these 2 lines. So that should hopefully give you an idea of how we can actually start to interact more with strings, and how we can analyze our strings to make more advanced programs that are specifically designed to interact with strings. So that is basically this problem.